These American lobsters are caught in the crosshairs of probably the world's biggest trade war. US tariffs on Chinese goods came into effect on Friday, and the crustacean is now facing an additional 25% import duty before landing on Chinese menus.
There's nothing much we can do here if there's a trade war. All we can do is adjust our supply chain here depending on the size of the price increases.
China's hunger for American lobster has skyrocketed more than 17,000% over the past decade. Imports reached around $130 million in 2017. That's a fifth of all US lobster exports.
If the tariffs are added, the price of lobsters imported to China will go up.
And to make up for losses, China has struck back. Moments after the US tariffs went into effect, China imposed retaliatory levies, matching Washington's 25% tax on $34 billion of goods.
When China's own legitimate rights have been treated unfairly, China undoubtedly carries out necessary retaliation.
The back-and-forth tariffs have left companies around the world with only two choices: absorb the cost of tariffs and take a hit in profits, or hike prices and possibly lose sales. Automaker BMW chose the latter. The German car giant mainly exports high-end SUVs to China and shipped more than 100,000 cars there last year. It will now raise prices on the vehicles it makes in the US and exports to China. Its rival Daimler is already feeling the impact of the trade dispute. Its global sales fell almost 3% in June, its first monthly decline in 5 years. US President Donald Trump, however, is sure the US is doing the right thing.
I respect China and I respect President Xi, but they've been killing us. $507 billion in trade deficits last year. 507. Who the hell can lose 500? Then you want to do something about it, you get attacked. Oh, that's not nice. That's not free trade. The war was lost on trade many years ago. You know, when they were saying, not a free trader, I said, no, the war was lost. But now we're going to win it. And because we have all the cards.
Trump has now upped the ante. He says his administration may expand the tariffs to $500 billion worth of Chinese goods, roughly the total amount of the goods US imported from China last year. And just as before, Beijing says it'll strike back in equal measure. As the world's two biggest economies flex their muscles, it's the consumer who will end up paying the higher price. Jemimah Walker, TRT World.
Earlier, we spoke to China analyst Einar Tangen. He says US consumers and workers, and farmers in particular, are feeling the pressure.
Well, farmers, first off, I mean, by canceling half of the soybean order that China puts in, which is 40% of the total crop, you're going to start to see some really, really heavy pressure on these small farmers. The smaller they are, the more difficult it's going to be for them to survive. But second will be consumers who will start paying more. And then finally, businesses themselves who are part of this massive supply chain at which China is the center of. It's already been pre-planned. About 91% of the pain is going to be felt in the agricultural sector and some in the automotive. Just keep in mind, what's going on here from the U.S. perspective is that Donald Trump wants to change the role of China in terms of the international supply chain. It wants to recenter it somewhere other than China. Unfortunately, it will not be recentered in the U.S. because, quite frankly, the cost of doing business there would be too high. More likely, it goes to other places in Southeast Asia where you can get a bigger bang for your labor buck. All-out trade war, if you go back to Smoot-Hawley in 1930, 2/3 of the world's export and international trade disappeared between 1929 and 1934. On the good side of this, I think you have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a lot of people, farmers, et cetera, who are going to be putting a tremendous amount of pressure, if not directly on Donald Trump, on their congressmen and senators who are coming up for re-election and telling them that they're not prepared to take this kind of pain. They don't want to lose their house, their farm, and they don't want to lose their business.
Let's get more on all of this now. And joining me from Great Barrington in Massachusetts in the US is Jeffrey Tucker. He's the editorial director of the American Institute for Economic Research. Jeffrey, great to have you on the show. as always.
Always.
Very good,
Yes.
thank you. Now, look, we've seen a rebound in share prices in Hong Kong, mainland China. Looking at the markets now in Wall Street, nice little bump there for all three indexes on the back of those jobs report. Meanwhile, China is warning of the largest trade war in economic history. Is this also the greatest mispricing of assets in financial history?
Well, it's interesting to imagine how devastating this would be if the U.S. economy was not so strong right now. It's the only reason Trump is able to get away with this at all, because the U.S. has gone through about 10 years of slow stagnation and very slow growth, and now it's roaring back after finally having recovered from 2008, and that builds in a little bit of breathing room for Donald Trump to do things like this trade war. But I tell you, these are very frustrating times for American economists. You know, you ask any American economist, 98% of them, 99.9% of them will tell you that these actions by the administration are very dangerous for the world economy and for American manufacturers in particular.
Okay, that's the view from economists, and I think you're absolutely right. All economists are more or less on the same page when it comes to this. But what are you hearing from company executives in the US, for example, that you've spoken to? How worried are they about their future?
Well, right now, so this is a new day. Up to now, people have thought that Trump had some kind of end game in mind, that the purpose was to open markets, was to, to offer these threats and bring them to the bargaining table so we could maybe get freer trade. They thought it was like a tactic. But now people are starting to realize what I've been warning about for 3 years, namely that Donald Trump is an economic nationalist who wants a trade war and wants to restructure global supply chains in a way that's frankly never going to happen.
Right.
So what he's doing is born of a kind of mercantilist ideology, really, more than a tactic. You notice that he never does lay out an end game. You'll notice during the whole run up to this final first shots of this war, he kept changing what it is that he wanted. It was one day it's intellectual property problems, the next day it's the trade deficit problems. You know, the next day it's something else. Yeah. So he set up kind of a funny puzzle, like it's almost impossible to comply with his demands, and I think that's for a reason, because Donald Trump wants a high tariff economy.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important word there, Jeffrey, mercantilism. You say that it's a form of American mercantilism. Trump would counter that he's countering a form of Chinese mercantilism in the world.
Yeah, this doesn't pan out. I mean, the U.S. has some, by that standard, the U.S. subsidizes enormous amounts of industries, from logging to agriculture to oil to everything. And if other countries did to the U.S. what we're now doing to other countries, Donald Trump would be screaming bloody murder. So we were making progress. It's true. And we were making progress towards free trade over the course of the decades. And the U.S. was becoming a nicer player in the international community, especially with the WTO serving as a kind of dispute resolution procedure for an emerging rule of law. And then one day Donald Trump gets elected and he does everything he promised to do. The problem is that people never really believed that he would go this far. So I think this is a new day. American executives need to get really busy. There's something, though, that people need to realize about American politics. It's actually extremely dangerous. Congress long ago gave up all of its authority to manage trade policy. So unfortunately, Donald Trump has an immense amount of personal power in this realm.
So, assuming the Democrats make sweeping victories in November in the midterms, they still may not actually be able to exert very much influence when it comes to trade policy.
No, and so that's right. They can't muster the kind of majorities that would be necessary to, for example, weigh in and change the balance of power between the executive and the Congress on this rulemaking. So the irony is that the reason it came to be centralized in the executive branch over the decades was because people thought that Congress was too corrupt and too protectionist oriented to manage trade policy, and they thought we'd get freer trade if we put it in the hands of the executive, right? But that was a dangerous bargain. It mostly worked until the wrong guy got all the power.
office.
Now
It's going to be interesting to watch. Jeffrey Tucker, American Institute for Economic Research, thank you very much indeed for your time.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.